I'm going to be talking about bump mapping and specular mapping today. Again, as I've already mentioned, bump mapping and specular mapping are going to give us basically three-dimensional detail on a two-dimensional surface. This is actually not going to be real physical detail. This is not going to be like actual changes in the surface topography of a model, but what this does is it basically fakes detail that allows us to be able to make something look more photorealistic. So you guys ever, I'm sure some of you play video games, right? At least one. You're like, what? What's a video game? I never heard. So video games, when you're walking, like, let's say down like a cobblestone street, if you're looking down like in Fallout and you look down at the cobblestone street's not really like modeled of like thousands of little cobblestones. In a video game, it's not. If you hit the C button and crouch and look down, it's going to be just a flat plane. So but when you move around and look at the cobblestone, the light's going to change and the highlights are going to change based on your position in relation to the light to the cobblestone. So it's going to make it look real, right? We've all done that, right? We all sit there and like look at textures and, right? We're all obsessed about this stuff. Alex is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Huh?
I'm trying to keep myself here.
Okay. So anyway, that's what a bump map does for us, is it allows us to get that extra bit of detail, but it's really just, it's a facade. It's not real. But again, it's just a cheap way of getting some detail in there. It's really good for character details. So if you have like a character with like skin pores, scales, things like that, we can add that stuff on really easily to a character by using bump mapping. We can add like sweat sheens with like specular mapping. Some certain areas of the character might be a little more reflective, and so a spec map will give us that. And this is all stuff that like we can add in the same way that we added in like a texture map into our models last week. So it's all just layering in new images into the shaders that we're creating for our models. Okay? So my thing today is I'm going to be going over doing a tile floor, which is going to give you guys at least a decent basis in how to create this stuff, and it's up to you to take this and kind of run with it and see where you can go with this approach. Okay? So see if everything is up unloaded properly. Cool, there we go. Should have a number of images in here. Heck yeah. All right, so this is my long-running super cool project number 5000. This thing has been around for a really long time. Let's see. So it's just a corner scene. That's all it is. It's a lamp, it's a sphere, a table, a couple walls, and some picture frames. And so every semester I go through this, texture it, but it gives me an opportunity to kind of like build up, different materials. And usually I end up having a fair amount of fun because then I can kind of make like different narratives with this. Let's see. I've probably been using this one about 6 or 7 years. So this one's like a Star Wars based one.
I like that Star Wars theater.
So anyway, I basically I have a ton of texture maps in here that I can use. Additionally, I have collected a number of Flemish pet paintings and Mr. Bean being put onto Renaissance type portraits as well. So they're just adorable. So anyway, but I do have a lot of other textures in here, like some wood and carpet and stuff like that that I can use. So let's go ahead and set our project. All right. And I'm going to go and create a new light. And we'll go ahead and render this out real quick. So, just a plane, it has nothing on it. Let's go and throw on a Pixar surface shader. Again, nothing's on the Pixar surface shader. But let's go ahead and put on a color map for the Pixar surface shader. So I'm going to go open up my Hypershade. Graph the network out. All right, I'm going to go and hit Tab. This little box is going to pop up. This is going to let me kind of type in anything that I need. So if I want to go ahead and make a PXR TEX Pixar texture node, I can go ahead and type that in and click it. And so this is what's going to allow me to load in a color map. So I'm going to click on Pixar Texture 1. And then I'm going to go over to Source Images. And then I'm going to look for my tile. So that's actually my tile bump map, but I want my tile color map. Victorian kitty.
Have you seen the jokes on like Renaissance painters with cats, how they can't really like draw cats or dogs? It's really bad.
I haven't seen that. There it is.
I know, they're great.
Alright, so this is just a seamless tile texture I found. So I'm going to take that. And that goes into the color diffuse. So I'm going to middle mouse drag from here over to here, and you'll see that it will attach with a little red line right there. And then in a second, we'll pop in. And now we have our tile. Now, the tile looks okay. I mean, it's, you know, it looks like it's there, but it doesn't really look like tile. It looks like really just a printed image on a flat plane. It's a veneer. Same thing as this table right here. This isn't real wood. It's just compressed wood with a 2D image. Yeah. It's already recording. So if we get close, we don't really have any detailing whatsoever. So what we need is to create some sort of detail for this to work. Now, a bump map is going to be a node that works off of grayscale values. So the darker the value, the more subducted the detail is going to be. The lighter the value, it's going to be more of a crest. So it's going to actually go up. So it's going to appear to have a dip and then a crest. And this is all going to be based off of grayscale, so white to black. All right. So color images, they kind of will work, but it's not really intended to work with color images. So anytime I'm going to be making a bump map, I'm always going to be either taking a color image and transitioning it over to a grayscale image, so I can have those grayscale values and then more appropriately work with those in Photoshop. Okay. So if I go ahead and just take, honestly, this color map and just pop it straight into the bump, you'll see that it will give us detail, but not in the way that we really need it. So you're probably wondering, well, where do we put a bump? So if I actually look on the Pixar surface right here, if I scroll down, there's actually multiple places to put bumps. But the main place we need to go is going to be under Globals, and then we're going to see Bump. All right, so that is where I'm going to put my overall bump for this model. I'm going to click on the checkerboard. It's going to bring me up the create render node, and then we're going to go under RenderMan. And then under pattern, PXR bump. And you'll see pops up right there. So I want to go into the bump node. So I click on the little box. It moves me over to the bump node that's plugged in. If you want to look and see what it visually looks like, this is what it looks like. We now have a bump node that is being output is the result in, which actually stands for result normal, that is going into the bump normal channel of the Pixar Surface 1. So that's where it's plugging in. All right, so here we have Pixar bump, we have a scale, we have a input bump for the pattern, we have a texture if we want to put like a file texture in. So we have a couple things we can plug in here. The pattern is going to be more of a, if you have like a procedural texture that you want to use, like say a noise or a fractal or something like that that's being created inside of Maya or RenderMan, you can actually plug that into the pattern right here. But really what you're going to be doing is, if you're going to be taking like a 2D image you got out of Photoshop or you created in Photoshop, you're going to be taking that out and putting that into the texture channel right here where it says file name. Okay? So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to go ahead and go over to the texture that I actually just plugged in. So I need to find it. Where did you go? There you are. And I'm going to go ahead and click that. And so what's going to happen is it's going to translate the values from that 2D image into bump. All right. So it's looking at the lighter values. The lighter, closer to white it is, it's going to try to make it basically bump up, and then the darker values is going to make it bump down. So this is just me basically just re-adding in the same image that I used for the color map. As we see here, that's not going to be appropriate because the tile and the grout should be a lot smoother. The tile itself should be bumped up, and the grout, if done well, should be bumping down. Unless you have a really bad guy that did your tile for you and he didn't clean it up. Huh? I mean, it is disgusting, but also like I feel like it'd be like a tripping hazard. Like that's not how tile should work. Yeah. Exactly. All right. So what we need to do is to basically look at maybe some of the ways we can kind of work with the values here, and maybe we can edit the map to get it to work the way we need to. Okay. So what I want to do is actually go ahead and open up Photoshop, and then I'm going to go ahead and take that seamless right here. That's not what I want. This one. And bring that into Photoshop, and let's take a look at it. Okay.
This is the same tile that you used previously, right?
Yeah, this is the same image. So right now, what we're looking at is just the same color image. And so if we kind of look at this and then compare it to this, we can kind of see where we're running into some problems. Honestly, this is just really noisy kind of all over. So what I'm going to do actually is just go ahead and grab that bump node, this, and I'm going to go over to scale and see if I can bring the noise down. Because honestly, at the scale it's at right now, like no matter what I do to the image, it's going to look kind of like garbage. So I'm going to bring it down to like a 0.5, and it should kind of even it out just a little bit for us. Maybe not a whole lot. Let's do like a 0.1. So you'll see it's kind of smoothing it out. it's better, like that's serviceable. But here at least we can make a little bit better detailing of like what's going on. So everything kind of has a little bit of like a rocky detail. We can see here the way that the light is hitting it, that the grout does appear to be popping up on top of the surface. And if we move the light, we can see how the shadows actually end up changing direction a little bit. And in reaction to the light direction. All right, so if we go back to Photoshop, what we're going to need to do is turn this into something that's a little more serviceable as an actual bump map. So what we can do is go ahead and let's make a new layer. We're going to do a Hue Saturation Layer because I need to grayscale this image. So I'm going to go and bring the saturation down. I'm going to do another one that's going to be a contrast. And basically what I'm going to try to do is I want to invert the values. Okay, I want to go ahead and take my whites right here, so like this, the white grout lines, and I want to make them go darker than the rest of the tile because they need to be subducting downwards. So what I can try to do is maybe bring up my contrast. Try to get this maybe look a little bit wider. Let me get my brightness to go down a little bit. So you get that to pop just a little bit more. Okay. I can do a select, color range, and I'm actually going to select like that area right there. And I'm just basically just going to try to select the grout area. And I'm going to actually paint it black. That didn't work. How big's my brush? Oh, it's 5,000 pixels. That'd explain why. Yeah, it might be a bit much. Let me try to do my selection again. Color range. Okay. So that's not going to be perfect. That'll give me a little something I can work with. I'm going to go in and paint that dark. Alright, I'm going to go on deselect and grab my pen. Where's my pen? There's my pen. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to get this area just kind of darkened in.
I'm guessing doing it this way leaves in the bumps of like the darker
Mm-hmm.
parts.
Yeah. Then I'm going to run a Gaussian Blur on it to kind of meld it all together a little bit. That's totally doable if you wanted to. Yeah, you could do that if you wanted to. It really kind of depends on like what you're trying to get. If it if it makes sense to invert it or not. I have done that and works just fine with like this particular image.
But I guess doing it like this gives you more like control of how the bump looks.
Yeah, I mean what you could do is you could invert it and then like just go in and mask out some of the areas a little bit more if you wanted. Because depending on the texture map, there could be lighter areas on the color map that are actually like physically maybe a little bit above the rest of the material. So they might be a little bit lighter in color because of like wear, like maybe shoes hit that part of the tile more, and so it's not as so it's continuously being ground down, and so because it's again it's a higher piece, higher material. And maybe like dirt is like collecting like in some of these like darker areas. And so maybe inverting it doesn't really do anything for you. Maybe it actually ends up hindering it a little bit. So you might not do it then. So it really kind of, again, it just kind of depends on like what you want to do or how you want to, what kind of result you want to get from it. So I'm going to go to Gaussian. Let's bring it down. Something like that will be fine. All right. And then what you could do is if you want to kind of play around with the contrast a bit more, depending on it. Well, with this, playing with the contrast is going to really kind of either push more detail to come out of the bump map or it's going to smooth it out. It depends on what you're trying to get from that material. So this tile may be more slate-like, and so it's going to have a little bit more of a rougher surface. So you may honestly want more contrast, which may actually work for what you're trying to get. But maybe if you're trying to get something to look a little bit smoother, you might bring down, say, the contrast to kind of get everything a little bit more closer in their grayscale value. All right. We'll do another brightness and contrast. Pull the contrast up. Maybe pull the brightness down a little bit so I get a little bit more detail there. Something like that. So maybe end up looking a little bit more craggy. Maybe pull that brightness just a little bit up so like the darker areas are just not quite as dark as the mortar. And then what we can do is go ahead and save this out as a TIFF image. And so last week I was talking about my color naming convention or my map naming convention. So I'll do like CMP for color map. So for this I would do like BMP for bump map. So I can do tile underscore BMP. Click OK. Click OK. Let's go back to Maya. And now let's go ahead and put back in that new file and see how that looks.
And you're putting the new file in under Pixar Bump?
Yes. Yeah. All right. So this is what I'm working with now. Reload it. Give it a second. It's got to make the new texture TX file, and now, big difference. And so I'm going to talk a lot about, when I'm talking about bumps, I'll say things look really crunchy, and that is kind of like my way of saying that maybe there's a little bit too much detail, there's a little bit too much depth there. So I think honestly with these, it's good to have a subtlety to your bump map. Overdoing it makes it really apparent you have a bump map, and sometimes that's good, but for me a lot of times it's not good. So I usually try to dial it down, try to make it a little more subtle. So like on this, I'll probably take the scale. It's already pretty low, like a 0.01. Maybe go to a 0.001. And so that will maybe, it's pretty subtle. Like if you get kind of close, you'll see some of that bumping, dipping that's going on there. So maybe that'll be a little bit better. But honestly, maybe we'll go a little bit higher than that 0.005. That's not too bad. It gets worse when we look at it more closely, because then the camera, we kind of lose some of that illusion right there, especially when the camera gets really close to the surface. But a bump map I think is really just it's strongest when the camera's not too close to it. Like when it's a fair distance away, it works really, really well right about here. It's when we get too close that we need to start thinking of doing other approaches to get that type of detail to come across. Because when you're, if you're an ant on the floor, you really need to think about doing maybe like what's going to be referred to as a displacement map, it's like a bump map, and it physically pushes the actual topography or topology up or subducts it down. Like physically it actually does it at render time, or actually just have a really nicely modeled tiled floor. Something that physically would be going up and down.
This doesn't actually modify the topology, it just communicates with the lighting.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all in relation to the lighting. So if I go and zoom in really close, you'll see it's not actually moving the model. I mean, the model is still just a flat plane. And so we lose that illusion when we get close to it, but again, it looks better when we're further away. Mm-hmm.
So you said when it has too much depth, it looks like kind of crunchy, right?
Yeah.
And you had it, it just looked like the tile faces were really dark.
Yeah.
Is there a way to like adjust, one value, like the darkness of it, like the dark value instead of the light value?
Yes. That's Photoshop.
Okay.
So you're going to go into Photoshop and you'll play with, say, the contrast of it and get it to either move up a little bit closer to each other, like the values, lowering the contrast, or raising the contrast if you want a little bit more detail.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's going to be a bit of an interplay between Photoshop and the scale of the bump map right here. So usually I'll try to play around with the scale and get it to something I like, and then if it's still not working 100% of where I want it, then I'll go back into Photoshop and work with it inside of that program. And if you feel like your values are going just too low, like I'm going with like 0.005 here, so it's not, it's not crazy to go this low on these values. All right, that's basically a bump map. Like it's pretty straightforward. It's just a grayscale image that adds in more detail. Okay, all right. Let's talk about maybe patterning this image, because right now, I got maybe 8 tiles, maybe 4 and then 4 half tiles on this image, but I need to be able to repeat this image a few times in order for me to get this to actually look like a tile floor. All right, because right now it doesn't. It just looks like a gigantic floor. So what I need to do is actually go in and be able to repeat this a number of times to get it to actually feel more realistic. So I'm going to use what's referred to as a manifold node to actually get it to repeat for me. So what I'm going to do is go into, let's actually go and look at this visually. I'm going to go into my Pixar texture, and you'll see we have a channel called manifold. All right. So I'm going to click on manifold, and it's going to give me a couple options here. So if I go to Pixar Manifold 2D, that's what I'm looking for. I'm going to click on that. And here, this is going to allow me to pattern or repeat the image as much as I want. So I can change the angle of the image, I can change the scale, I can change the offset. So if I do angle, if I go ahead and click on this, we can get it to rotate the image. Now this is just the color map I'm working with, it's not the bump map. So you'll see how it is actually rotating the color map around.
Someone grabbing your tile on.
Exactly.
So do you have to redo whatever you do on there on the bump map, or can you just like connect?
In some cases, yes, we can take the same node and just pop it back in. For the bump node, we'll probably need to use a bump manifold node, since there's one specific to it. But this is where we can do some adjustments if we need to. Usually, I'm really just kind of messing with the scale. So scale right here, I can change it to like a scale of 10 and 10. Actually, that's probably a little bit too big for you guys. Let's do 5 and 5. So you'll see by doing 5 and 5, that gives me a repetition of 5 across and 5 down. And so now, you know, that's not bad. It kind of looks a little more tile-ish. Let's do 3 and 3. I'm keeping the same values here because if I do, like, say, 3 and 1, it'll give me 3 across, but then it'll keep the same 1 value, so it's just going to stretch it. Which maybe is what you want. I don't know. Maybe that's what you're going for. Generally, I don't. But maybe you're doing something cool, something interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
About, so when you use the image for a color map, you typically want a pretty high quality image, right?
Mhm.
Like what would you?
I try to get the highest quality I can find. So if you're going to be, using one of our cameras or using your phone, those take, usually between 2 and 4K images now. That's pretty decent for like a texture map, especially if you're going to be patterning it and repeating it. That's the file size is not going to matter as much because it's going to be basically repeated. It's going to be a lot smaller, so it's actually going to end up being a higher quality image because it will be repeated. Okay, so you can take a like if it's a 1,000 by 1,000 image and it's repeated, let's say 4 times, it's now kind of a 4K image, or 8 by 8 will be an 8K image. So it's a way of taking a lower quality image and making it appear better than it actually was. But I always try to get the nicest quality image I can. Always try. All right. So let's do 3 by 3. So bump map clearly is not fitting. So let's go ahead and take that. I'm going to make another manifold node. This is going to be the Pixar bump manifold 2D. I'm going to take this guy. It's basically the same thing as the manifold 2D here, but this one's for bumps. And I need to plug this into the bump manifold channel right here. So I'm going to middle mouse drag this node into here. Hit enter, and boom, it plugs in. Another way we could do it is if I kind of pop open the input outputs with this button right here, I know I need to go into the manifold, which is this. And then I can take my result and plug that into the manifold as well, if you want to do it that way. Whatever you want to do. But sometimes I'm not really sure what channel it needs to go in, so I just middle mouse drag it into here, and it still works. Okay? Okay. All right, so that was a 3x3, right? For the manifold. So I'm going to do a 3x3. There we go. So now it's repeating my map 3 times by 3 times. So that works. So now I got a tile floor. Yay! Okay, any questions so far? All right, let's move on to specularity. All right, so if I go over to primary specular, I can give myself a primary specular face color. So what that is going to do, let's actually go ahead and have something for it to actually reflect on. Let's do. Yeah.
That like circular eye thing that I appreciate. That's supposed to show us like example of like what we're creating with the material, or that's supposed to.
Technically, yes. I don't ever pay attention to it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's technically supposed to, but I don't mess with it. I mean, you can tell it to switch over to RenderMan if you wanted to, and it'll give you like a little preview. But I don't care. I don't ever mess with it. I mean, it's not even showing anything right now, so. All right. Anyway, so here's my sphere. Same shader as this one. So if I go ahead and do the specularity and up my face color by quite a bit, we can get this thing to get pretty shiny. But if we look at the sheen, it's pretty even. It is broken up a little bit by the bump, but it's still pretty damn shiny. It's like someone took floor wax to it. And that's not really what a tile floor should look like. Like if it's wet, then maybe, but in general, it's not gonna look like that. So a few things we can do is we can try to get the bump map that we created to try to influence the specular highlighting that's going on here. But we'll need to create a specialized spec map in order to get this to work. So if we go to specular, primary specular, and click advanced, you'll see that there is in fact a bump channel. That's kind of cool. In fact, there's actually multiple bump channels. If I go to rough, there's another bump channel in here. If I go to clear coat, look at that, another bump channel. There's actually a ton of bump channels that are inside of the Pixar surface shaders that you can actually layer in multiple bump maps. And they don't have to be the same bump map. You can have multiple bump maps for whatever you want to pick up whatever detail you need. But for funsies, we're just going to be working with one for this example. All right? So we can take bump right here. I'm going to take the Pixar bump, middle mouse drag it over to the bump here, and we'll see what that does. So what's going on is it's taking that bump map and it's using it to try to figure out where we need to get highlighting from, where we need to get shadowing, where we need to do a roughness breakup of the map. Wherever we're getting highlights here, and so we're kind of getting some of that information from the bump. So it is helping. It's making it look a little more realistic, but it's still not quite there. So a specular map is going to be extremely similar to a bump map. It's going to show detail in areas that are white, areas that are black. It's not going to show as much detail. It's not going to show as much reflection. Okay? So if we think of things like, let's say, the microphone. Areas on here that would be more reflective might be the blue symbol, might be the label that's around here. Areas that are not as reflective are going to be the plastic casing that go around the microphone's housing, maybe the rubber cord or the stand. So these areas, if we had a specular map, would be darker colors. Areas that we want more reflection, like the blue symbol, would be lighter colors. Okay, again, going off whites and blacks. All right, grayscale. Okay, so it's the same idea. So if we take that into consideration, we can make a spec map basically from our bump map and kind of go in and maybe work with some of these values. So let's do, maybe play around with the brightness, maybe up the contrast a little bit, almost to where it's just basically just a straight, maybe black and white, or maybe I want maybe a little bit more definition here. Actually, let's try this. Let's make this a lot darker. And I'm going to bring down the contrast, maybe somewhere right about that. And for fun, let's add in a new layer. And I'm going to add in some wet spots. Or some highlighted areas, I guess I should say. Okay. And then let me go into filter. Let's do Gaussian Blur. Okay, something like that. All right, so we got two highlights and we got two areas that are not highlighted. So I'm going to go and save that. So that's not going to be my tile BMP. That's going to be spec maps. That'll be SMP.
So as long as we save it as a TIFF, it will preserve the layers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one reason why I like using them, because I can just open it right back up in Photoshop and keep working. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and go into actually a face color, and I'm going to load in a image into my face color. So that's going to tell it like where I want the areas to be a little bit brighter and darker. So let's go under pattern. Put in a texture. And the face color is going to influence the color of the highlighting. So if you wanted to do like something special where it's like, you know, it only highlights a certain color, you can actually paint that into your specular map if you wanted to. Okay. And then let's go ahead and go back to roughness. So we can tell through the spec map, we can tell this where we want this to be roughest. Actually, let's go and take so this will actually be the specular map right here, PXR texture 2. So let's take this guy, we will map him into roughness. And so actually the roughness is a grayscale only channel. So it's actually telling us, saying, hey, what output do you want to go into what input? So what I'll need to do is actually say, basically tell this image that I want to turn this into a grayscale image, even though it is technically in Photoshop, but TIFFs are RGBA compliant images, meaning they have red, green, blue, and an alpha channel. So I need to basically take that and turn it into a grayscale value. Okay, it's a little weird. It's already a grayscale image. You're like, well, why should that ever matter? But it does. So I need what's called a 2-float, PXR 2-float. And that's going to allow me to output my result RGB into the input. And then that is going to allow me to take my result and put that into the roughness.
Is there a way you can change the color mode in Photoshop to grayscale before you?
I mean, you can change it under image and do adjustments.
I think it's image mode.
Image mode, yeah.
Grayscale.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that's actually going to output the image. So I just end up using the 2-float to give me what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And then finally what I'm going to go ahead and do is take the bump channel that we had. Bring this back. The bump channel that we had moving into the specular. And I'm actually going to replace that with the new specular map that we created to see if we can get that to kind of work a little bit more for us with the specular highlighting. So I'm going to do PXR bump. We're going to take this and we're going to actually pop that into primary specular bump. And actually, before we move, I did forget to do one thing. The PXR texture, I need to actually put a manifold in it since I multiplied the image by 3 times. I did not do that with this new spec map that I added in. So I do need to do that. So let me do that real quick and see how that looks. So I'm going to do PXR manifold 2D. So it's going to be result into manifold. And what was that value again for the scale? 3 by 3. Okay, let's take a look at this real quick and see what that does. Okay, there we go. We're getting some of that. See that white area right there? We're getting that kind of highlight. So that's looking kind of nice. Let's look down at the floor. So there we go. All right, let's go ahead and put in that new bump, which is this guy. That new file name, I'm going to put it in. It's going to be the new texture, Pixar bump. So that's going to be the tile SMP. And then also we're going to do another bump manifold right here. Make sure it lines up. And then that it's going to be 3 by 3 as well. Cool. So we're getting a little bit more crunchy detail from that bump that we put into the specular, which then we can go in and just turn down if we wanted to. But we are getting some of that highlighting though going on here that we were looking for from that specular map, which is kind of cool. So let me take that bump node. Let's take it down to like 0.5. Maybe go like 0.1. That's a bit better. I like that. 0.05. So before we were having that kind of consistent sheen of reflection on the entire surface of the tile, which would be physically inaccurate. It just would not physically look like that. But now that we went in, added some maps in, we're breaking it up, and we're also basically reinforcing some of these really nice details that we're getting in the slate, in the tile, that we didn't have before, just coming off the color map. But because we're taking it and we're combining the color map with the specular map, with the bump map, with the modified specular bump map, we're getting this wonderful range of detail that we just did not have before. So I hope you guys kind of see where I'm coming from with this. By layering all this in, we can create some really cool, more realistic textures than what we've been working with before. All right? You guys have any questions at this point?
I had a question, but I forgot.
Well, I can't answer a question you
Is there
forgot.
a way, is there a way to like mask areas off? If you want to like only affect a certain area when you're going about adjusting area?
Yeah, I mean, in Photoshop, you could just paint it out black or straight white or something if you want to try to mask that out. Are you thinking like,
Like if you only wanted to affect the grout lines instead of the tile, because it seemed like some of the problems where there's too much detail in the tile.
yeah, I mean, you could just take the, like say if you wanted to tone down the detail in the tile, you could basically pull the contrast down in the Photoshop image. And, or you could mask out, like say do like a contrast layer, bring down the contrast, but then mask out the grout if you wanted to. So that would be a way to kind of go in and affect that. Yeah.
So is the scale basically like the depth of it?
Scale on the bump is, yes. Now, scale is also on manifold, so don't get those two confused, because then you can also, like, scale is basically just repetition in the manifold. So how big the image is going to appear. Okay. All right, if you guys don't have any questions, I'll turn you loose and let you start working. All right, cool. Good work, guys.